Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is rolling with the punches. Sometimes life just doesn't go the way we want it to go, and it's easy to fall into frustration and resistance. And today we're going to talk about the power of exploring, letting go of all that, and just rolling with the punches to be able to smell the flowers along the way. So before we get started, oh, good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. Before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, today we're talking about rolling with the punches. It's funny, the gifts that life gives. I draw a lot of our conversation from experiences that I've had with other people or with myself, and that's where today's topic is coming from today. I had an appointment to get blood work for a doctor's appointment that I have later. And I had to get up early to go and be there on time. And I had to be fasting, which was fine. And I got there, and the order for the blood work was supposed to have been called in on Friday. I get there, and it turns out that it wasn't called in, or it was actually called in partially. And of course, the doctor, people weren't in the doctor's office wasn't open. And I had to wait for the doctor's office to open. And then my doctor wasn't there, and had to wait for somebody to call in the blood work. And it came to the point where there was no time left to be able to get the blood work, so I had to leave without it. And then I got back home and started trying to get online for this conversation today, and my computer decided that it was going to update. So, and I was in the midst of the update, and it looked like there wasn't going to be time to be able to pop on in time. And I'm recounting this just because I imagine that everybody has experienced these kinds of serial frustrations. And what I found myself doing throughout that process, where I was feeling pushed and pulled to be here on time to have this conversation today, and to get the blood work done, and the frustration of things not unfolding in the way that, quote unquote, they were supposed to. And noticing that I was, what was happening with me emotionally, and how we can allow ourselves to move beyond our resistance and our frustration so that we can still appreciate life. So I was alert to how my mind wanted to go into being furious, sort of having my own little temper tantrum, which I didn't. Although I did get to speak to the doctor's office and tell them that I was furious. but but I noticed that in noticing, I was able to kind of keep a little bit of a lid on the runaway emotion. Because I think that we have these patterns of getting into an emotional state, starting with the story. We do these loops. It accelerates our emotional state. We work ourselves into a tizzy. And that's not good for our body or being. And it's not good for anybody around us. And it generally doesn't help the situation. And it doesn't mean that we don't address the situation. I mean, this has to be addressed with the appropriate people so that this kind of thing doesn't happen to other people. Um, but one of the things that occurred to me in the process of this unfolding was the cascading effect of people's behaviors and people's choices. And I was planning originally to, in this particular situation, I was planning to go to get the blood work on Friday. I was told that it was called in. And had I gone, which I didn't because I had to be fasting, and it turned out that I couldn't go until later in the day. But had I gone, that I would have discovered then that the order for the blood work wasn't in, and I would have been able to go back today and get the blood work. So that's one cascading consequence. And another cascading consequence, I don't even know how it's going to pan out, but that this blood work wasn't in, so it is going to impact the visit with the doctor and impact having to go back and get blood work later, et cetera, et cetera. And I also noticed that if I didn't manage myself, that there would be an impact on the person that was there at the lab that was a negative effect, that could have been a negative effect that she had nothing to do with. And so to recognize the consequences of our behavior and our state, I think, is an important factor in inspiring us to manage it better. So this is actually an interesting conversation. It triggers a conversation that we had in the Regenerative Reads book club yesterday. We were reading a book called An Immense World by Ed Young, which I highly recommend. It's a little challenging because it's very, very informational and very rich in information, but it's about all different creatures and the way that they perceive the world, their senses of sight and sound, and being able to detect magnetic fields and all kinds of senses that we don't even imagine or recognize, and the way that they see, taste, touch, hear, feel is so foreign in so many ways to our experience. And because their senses and their what's called in the book Umwelt, their world view, that is the compilation of all of their sensory experience is so profoundly different from ours that we don't even imagine the ways that our development, our our civilization impacts their the lives of these beings. So for example, the light that we have in our cities and that we have propagated through most of the planet is extremely disruptive to lots of species, because we have this white light or blue light, and it disorients them and it impacts them. And for instance, and this was an amazing fact that I had no idea about, is that whales can send a sound that goes across an entire ocean. And if we think about that they are communicating across this vast distance, and we are adding ships and sonar and submarines and missiles and dredging and all kinds of things into that soundscape that is profoundly disruptive to these other life forms. And it's a way that we can see the ripple effect of our impact in the world that is beyond the human impact that we have. And then getting back to our interactions with people, you know, if we can be polite and decent, and even in expressing our upset, to be decent to one another, to be able to say, I'm really angry, this is not okay. That's an appropriate expression, whereas punching somebody in the face is not necessarily, right? So and we can get our point across, we can be communicating in a way that's respectful. And I think this is a really important conversation, you know, to be able to on a bunch of different levels, to be able to roll with the punches, in that we can allow ourselves to relieve ourselves of that tension and the angst and the upset by breathing into things. I found myself just saying, life is happening for me and through me rather than to me. You know, that I get to shape my experience. And it was an opportunity truly to keep reminding myself of that, because my pattern wanted to go off into this whole tirade and be very righteous and indignant and victimized and all of that, rather than owning my engagement in the situation. And as a reward, I'm going to say, as a reward for doing that work well enough, maybe not expertly, but well enough, when I left the testing facility, it was raining. It was raining pretty heavily outside. And I was walking by trees that had pussy willows on them. And I was able to see, like, to be able to be present to the raindrops and the beauty of the reflected light, and these pussy willows sort of buds on the trees, and just the beauty of nature. And so I think that this is kind of one of the primary benefits of presence, is that it's fluid, that we get to be responsive, that we get to communicate in ways that are appropriate to the moment, that we don't become overtaken by our emotional reaction to circumstance, that we can observe what's going on so that we don't have to be owned by it, and we can take ownership of it. And rather than fall into reactivity, reacting, we can be responsible. We can be responding, and in a more appropriate way. And it was a really enlightening experience to be in this push-pull, to feel this inclination where part of me just wanted to be a runaway train, getting all into the reactivity and upset and blame. That was interesting too, to notice, that I saw myself wanting to assign blame rather than just being, oh, isn't this interesting? And cultivating some level of detachment of the observer rather than dissociation. And I think that that's an interesting nuance to look at too, that there can be detachment without dissociation. I don't know if you've given yourself the opportunity to observe yourself in some of these situations that are challenging, to notice, like, what's the dynamic, what's going on here, what is what is the plug and play kind of aspect of my being that becomes that runaway train, and can I unplug it in the midst of it? Because I was feeling my stomach knot up and my shoulders being really tense, and I noticed also that I really wanted to dissociate so that I wouldn't feel that. I just wanted to, like, disappear, check out. And I think that that's also a natural inclination of ours, is to want to check out when things are tough so that we don't experience all that contradiction and all that emotion and upset and the challenge of managing it. And it's this conflagration of emotion and kind of input, because we have our own input, which is that plug and play kind of story that we might default to. And then there's the will that says, you know what, I am committed to living into a higher place. So Shosha, welcome. So good to have you with us this morning. Shosha says, good morning. Thank you for this concept, detachment instead of disassociate. Yeah, so thank you for that recognition. Yeah, unattaching ourselves from something so that we can be a compassionate observer, so that we can be in the moment and also be recognizing what's occurring in that moment and these dynamics. It's complex. There's a lot going on from all these different angles to negotiate in a situation like that, when we're feeling triggered and we recognize that we're feeling triggered, and try, just, it's like a tightrope to walk, to find balance, and most importantly, to be in alignment with ourselves and our values, to be true to ourselves, our higher nature. And we can't always do that. Sometimes we get swept away by that runaway train. But this notion of self-observation, self-management, being curious, it's challenging to be curious when you're in a state of frustration and anger that's, wanting to come up because it's a natural response for some of us. I mean, anger used to be my first response to everything. I grew up that way. I say our family has it's not a genetic predisposition, but it's a um I'm not thinking of the word at the moment, but it's a family predisposition to anger. Like that's a pattern that is passed down. And so even though I've done tons of work and it's mostly dissipated, there are moments when that trigger gets tickled again. And that's kind of, oh, gets to get my attention to say, okay, so what's going on here? And what I got was things aren't going the way I want them to go. So I'm going to have a temper tantrum. And people are going to pay. That's not really what went through my mind. But, when we have a temper tantrum, we're kind of making other people responsible for our experience. So I managed to not have a temper tantrum, which I'm happy about. But I really was very present to what was happening on a bunch of different levels. And I think we have access to that kind of information. And if we can access that in the present moment, we don't have to be attached to it. So we don't have to hold that anger. We don't have to let that ruin our day, for example. It's like, oh, that happened. Interesting. What can I take away from that I can use to my benefit? And clearly I need to communicate to the doctor that this happened and that it's really not okay. Like that there's a correction in whatever the processes are that needs to happen. But being present to that whole thing, even though it was very intense and intensive in terms of attention and self-management and listening to my internal conversation and directing it with intention. The being able to be present was, well, when I walked outside, I could see the beauty in the raindrops on the trees and the pussy willow buds, and they weren't really pussy willows, but they looked like it. They were little fuzzy buds. And to appreciate each moment, and then the computer didn't work. So I could have, and in the past, certainly I would have just thrown up my hands, gone and had a scream or a cry, and that would be that. But I didn't need to do that because I was present. It's like, okay, the computer's not working. What do I do? Need to communicate. Oh, now the computer's working. Need to communicate, and then sign on and be with you. And so it really is about rolling with the punches, so to speak, and not holding them, because it is largely our resistance that has us feel really beat up in life. If we can roll with the punches, then we get to move into the next moment. And I never studied Aikido, But my understanding of it is using the energy of that momentum, whatever it is that's happening, to create a result. And so by allowing ourselves to manage ourselves, our internal stories, our not just manage them, but to be conscious and present to them and intervene appropriately, to move with that energy of presence, then we don't have to be locked into, oh, it's raining, so it's a terrible day. I mean, what's up with that? Or my computer wasn't working, or the blood work appointment wasn't there, and all those things. I could add it all up and make it mean something about how terrible a day it is. Whereas instead, I could just know, oh, okay, well, these things happened, and I can allow for all kinds of other magic, like the beauty of the trees. So I invite you into that inquiry for yourself to be able to create magic and expand your experience of that. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, I am so grateful for the opportunity to spend these morning musings with you on what it is to be human. So until next time, so much love to you.